Tonight, what we're going to do is catch you up on the work that went on in this room over the last several days and show some things that are really refreshing. Much of it just finished in the last 45 minutes or 2 hours, to the point where we can put it up on the screen, show it to you, and ask, is this what you meant? And double check it, because we're not finished. This is just work in progress, draft work. We are going to look at some what-if pictures and diagrams and information that explain those pictures, and then ask you some questions along the way, using the little keypads that I guess they're passing out now. Amy's passing them out. For those who are new with us tonight, come a couple of weeks ago, or to one of the events previously this week, we'll do a quick recap of what the process has been to get this far. And then we'll take a little tour through the corridor, as it might be in the future, and consider issues of placemaking and transportation and environment. Once we've done all that, the question will be burning in all of our heads, how would we pull off such a vision? How would we get that done? And so then we're going to switch gears and talk about how you would implement such a vision. At the end, they'll have the chance to get some late-breaking feedback. New images, printed poster signs are just coming out of the plotter now, and will be up on the wall when we're done. So at the end of the evening, we'll be able to go up and get closer to the maps and the pictures and look again at things that might be on the screen only for a few minutes. You can stare at them for as long as you want after that. Now, complete street study. How many of you have heard that term already prior to today? Complete street. What is a complete street? Well, the simple definition is that what makes a street complete varies depending on where you are, what that community needs, and how that community would like to use that street. It determines a list of things that need to be there in order for it to be complete.
Thank you.
The classic definition of a complete street means that it's different kinds of users, like people who are driving their cars, also people who are walking on their 2 feet, riding on 2 wheels, on a bicycle, or using transit, or shopping, or holding a 4th of July parade, or a Christmas tree lighting ceremony, or meeting a friend for lunch. For all of them, the street can be provided with necessary physical equipment for that activity. Does that make sense? Well, so what's an incomplete street? One that's just for driving and nothing else. So tonight what we have is work in progress so far. We stopped along the way, but we're not finished. What will happen is, after we get more feedback tonight, we'll take our team back to our offices and back to the Council of Government's offices, and we'll work on ironing out the contradictions that go out here, simplifying probably, making the parts that don't quite add up, getting to more information, and sorting the doable from the undoable more than we have so far. A couple of weeks ago, we had a kickoff meeting to give people a briefing about how this project is going to work, and give people food for thought about what makes a complete street. And we asked a couple of questions. One was for that audience, about 170 or so people, was how they typically move around. Of course, most of the people had arrived there that night by using Folly Road in one form or another and driving there. And a big majority did not select love it when we asked them how they feel about Folly Road today. That's okay. Because for urban designers, this is good news. It means since we're in the before and after business, we can make before and after pictures, and the existing conditions has the makings of a dramatic before and after picture. Okay. Existing conditions. Today, Folly Road is not living up to the expectations and needs of this community. It's pretty clear. And we heard about that in very, very many different ways in a lot of different dimensions. If you want to walk along the corridor, not too good. If you wanted to bike along the corridor, better in some places than others, but generally speaking, not too good. If you were a transit user along the corridor, where buses at best come every 90 minutes, not too great. For people who love James Island because of James Island's trees, there's much of the corridor that leaves something to be desired in the tree department. Now, if you use Folly Road to drive your car, you probably get frustrated in the traffic, because even little details, like traffic signals, seem to disappoint. And then, not to be mean, but here and there along the corridor, the architecture doesn't quite match up and reflect the increasing sophistication of this community. Okay? So, with all of that in mind, the makings of a dramatic before and after picture, let's talk about it as we should. We should think of Folly Road as a work in progress. It's a draft. It's what we've inherited on James Island, but it isn't finished. It's like every aspect of a community, continually a work in progress. A great work of civic art that many, many hands participated in the making of over centuries. It's not done. You're not finished. It's just a start. And so the Folly Road of tomorrow can be a lot better than the Folly Road of today. If there's one message I would like to convey to you, it's that. You have to squint and visualize and imagine it better. And then get to work on little things, or big things, to make your vision of how it be better come true. So the road's a draft. So is this presentation. Please repeat after me. Draft. Okay. Now, the important thing to understand is that nobody in charge, say the town council, the city council, the county council, the council of governments, the DOT, SCE&G, none of them have said yes to anything that we're going to show you tonight. Okay? I want to make sure that's very clear. They have to be given time to assimilate all this and think about it. We need to work up considerably more detail before the authorities and decision makers can really say, okay, yes, that's the vision, that's what we should pursue. So please remember that this will probably be refined. If there are 17 good ideas here, there may only be 14 in the final plan, and that will be okay. All right? But what if? Just imagine. What if you could walk down Folly Road, down a pleasant sidewalk, between any 2 points along the corridor? What if you could cross Folly Road without fear? What if? Actually, the places that are already there could turn into the places that are just that much better pretty easily. The places that you've got can be altered over time to be the place you'd rather have. What about the bikes? What if you could bike safely down a world-class protected bikeway all the way to the beach, and all the way across Wapuka to the West Bachelor Greenway, the East Coast Greenway, to the peninsula? What if? Get that, have to alter the place you've got where there's no room for that, and turn it into a place where there would be room for that. What if? For transit, what if there could be frequent, not every 90 minutes, frequent, high quality, first quality transit service that would look to you like a really competitive alternative, worthy of choosing compared to driving? Transit vehicles that are not stuck in traffic. It's hard to imagine, just imagine. Transit vehicles that are not stuck in traffic. And with bus stops that are so cool, it's actually fun to be there. What if? You can actually have that whole menu. You can have transit that's not stuck in traffic. You can have ways to get to the beach when everybody else is waiting in their cars. You can have that. As long as you're talking about moving around. What about those signals that I mentioned before? What if the traffic signals could be fully modernized and optimized in their timing with adaptive software and so on, sensors and cameras and all the stuff that the modern corridors have, so that the traffic signals are making things better rather than worse? What if? You can have that, because as the corridor is upgraded and as software is updated, that's all possible. As for the trees, For a lot of people we talked to this week, the trees are what makes James Island, James Island. If you recognize that spot, that was Riverland not too long ago. Well, in the 90s. But even in the 21st century, we can see the hand of your community's founders here and there along the corridor, where the majestic oaks remain, where the Ellis oaks were preserved. And you just think, wow, what if more of the corridor could be that? What if you get to the point where real shade trees, not necessarily all the biggest of different sizes, but real shade trees could be the rule rather than the exception. And as far as the built parts, the stores, the places where you go to an office, lodging, or residences, suppose the architecture along the corridor got gradually upgraded. It could be, with the diligent effort, the envy of the local. There's absolutely no reason you can't achieve that. So what if the built things you encountered along the way felt like they belonged here? And they grew out of the traditions of this place. That's what if. We're going to show you all that in more detail, I promise. I know I've flashed that fast, but that's the teaser. So, if you want to see how that could be possible, stick with us for the next few minutes, and we'll explain it. First, a question for you. Pull out your keypad, and we're going to poll you with one quick question, so those of us who are up here presenting or preparing for questions have an idea about who is here this week. Okay. So this question is what you attended. The event we held here over the last week, hopefully you'll come to think of it as a historic moment in the life of your community. It's called a charrette. And charrette events include the kickoff hands-on session on the 7th of May, a studio here in this room last Friday through Tuesday, an open house on the evening of Mother's Day, and tonight. We'd like you to use the buttons on your keypad and press the button that matches the event intended, so you can choose up to 3. Okay, I'm going to open the poll. You have 6 seconds. Let's see. We've got 66 responses. Okay, so for the other presenters, this means about half the folks in the room weren't here until tonight. So we have for the rest of you, that means we will go slowly over some of the stuff they may have already seen, just so that we can catch everybody. Okay. Let's look at what happened. On Thursday, what we did was we had a big crowd about this same size, but we weren't arranged theater style like tonight. We were arranged around small tables, each with maps and magic markers and other tools. And we worked for a while in those small groups after everybody got a little information briefing about what we were there to do. And then at the end of that, we had the folks switch over to these posters, which had a cross-section of the existing corridor on it. We gave everybody small working pieces. It's kind of like a version of Pin the Tail on the Donkey, but without the blindfold. And those game pieces had traffic lanes, bike lanes, bus lanes, sidewalks, trees, buildings, and so forth. And we said, arrange those in the corridor the way you would build your own ideal street. So we got a whole variety of answers in it. We noticed that people reached right down to the bag and pulled out as many trees as they could get right from the beginning, which was an interesting thing. We also asked people then when it was over to come back up to the front of the room and show everybody else what they did at their table. So, Amy, how many presentations did we have? 7 separate groups made presentations to all the others. And we found considerable overlap in their comments. We took notes as it went. We asked folks to tell us in those presentations their top ideas. 1, 2, 3, our number 1, 2, and 3 ideas. Although table 1 had 4 ideas right from the beginning, we started breaking them. And people said things like calm the traffic down or create a protected place to ride your bike. Now in the studio, during the week, we had people dropping in informally. We had people that came for specific technical topic meetings. So as work was being done on one side of the room, we were pinning it up on the other side of the room and bringing people through and asking them questions about what they saw. And that was an interesting room to be in because we had civil engineer, traffic engineer, landscape architect, urban designer, architect, economist, and others working side by side, asking each other questions, challenging each other to do the best work. Put that big banner up on the back wall that says Rethink Folly Road, passed out markers and asked people to write on there. You can still write on it tonight if you like, their ideas. And their ideas were pretty revealing. Safe pedestrian crossings. I get in my car just to cross Folly Road to go to the thing on the other side. Trolley. The speeds are too fast, slow down. Light the street properly. So as you can see, the suggestions we've been collecting have been pretty specific. We passed out a green piece of paper with questions on it. How many of you filled out one of these feedback forms? So there's a lot of room for you to write your own ideas. So instead of just responding to our multiple choice questions with the key badge, right? Some people wrote prose poems. One person wrote Tolstoy's War and Peace from memory. And we got a lot of information. A lot of people said, find a way to be more protected as we walk the bike. Not too surprising when it comes to complete street study. We suggested do something better for buses, do something better with trees. Here's one of my favorites. Good job, Amy. Somebody wrote. Amy Groves, our office principal and project director, for this effort, has been really the one shepherding everybody in this room over the last week. Then half a dozen of the bravest got borrowed and rented bikes, and we went out and we did what traffic engineers usually call them windshield surveys because they drive around. We did a handlebar survey and we rode the corridor. We got on the bikes and we rode the entire length of it, most of it twice, and up and down Griffith, and up and down the shopping centers, and up and down the West African Greenway. About 22 miles altogether. You can see here, John Ford is kind of frowning about that part of the experience where the posted speed, not even just the actual speed, the posted speed next to the skinny little paved shoulder called bike lane is 50 miles an hour. It'd be pretty uncomfortable. And we learned a lot from that. If you looked up on the screen when we walked in, we had a little time-lapse video of the handlebar survey playing on the screen. We can show that to you again at the end if you want to see it again. It was an eye-opening thing. We had seen the biking conditions from the car. Now we were able to experience it firsthand. We saw the storm drains that are silted up due to lack of maintenance, and the puddles that extend into the bike lane, making it skinnier. We saw the places where the bike lane is half gutter, and the places where the bike lane disappears altogether. We also saw that the pent-up demand just to walk on the corridor means that what's marked as the bike lane is actually only walking space in many circumstances. You can see the grass here is waist high, and so there's no alternative but walking right next to the fast-moving traffic. And because many of you admonished us, we'd better go do it, or we wouldn't believe you, we biked back and forth across the bottom of Pepper. Solve the whole problem. So we saw from the handlebars how it's not too great, but we also saw the tremendous potential. One of the fastest growing aspects of tourism in our country is related to bikes. The East Coast Greenway, which West Greenway is part of, actually will eventually connect from Key West in South Florida up to the Canadian border and beyond. And there are a lot of people who, for whom bike tourism is something they spend weeks at a time doing. They tend to be very big spenders also as they do it. Well, on the West Greenway, there's nothing like the view from Folly Beach. We think a lot of people would be interested in adding that to their East Coast Greenway trip. So from all that work, we ended up with 5 big categories of ideas. You can see some posters on that wall over there that get into more detail about what each of these mean. But the key kind of guidepost ideas, it's got to be safe, not just for walking and biking, but safer for people that are driving in their cars or taking their kid to school. It needs to be connected, and this is connected in every sense, in better connections to a surrounding street network. We need to redevelop some of the 1970s style strip shopping centers, which were just built as a parking, into a pattern of streets and blocks so that all of that traffic doesn't have to get out on Folly Road just for local purposes. It needs to be green, not just planting trees, but much more, and we'll talk about that. It needs to pay for itself. We need to actually take a value-added approach to any investment that's made in infrastructure here and say, how do we capture that value and make it worth it? And then last, it needs to be synced up, not just the signals, the traffic signals, but the interactions between the overlapping government agencies, teamwork between city and town and county and council and governments need to be synced into one unified approach. Let's just take a tour from the north to the south, and I'll show you some of the drawings we've been doing to check the ideas according to those 5 guideposts. You'll remember that the corridor is divided into these segments by the overlay district that the county and the city of Folly Beach and the town of James Island adopted. It describes on the south the conservation area, an area called the neighborhood preservation area around Grimble South and Salton Creek. The South Village, which includes the shopping center where Gold's Gym and Food Line are located. The commercial core, which is the area where I showed pictures earlier, and arguably the heart of town for the town of James Island. The North Village and Maybank, where obviously there's already considerable investment in redevelopment, infill, and change. On the north is quite different from the points to the south. And the north has the Wahoo Cut Bridge issue to that among its concerns. These maps show the aerial photograph, the boundaries of the city and the county and the town, kind of X-ray that shows the building footprints and the walking distances around the Maybank intersection. When we zoom in on that, here's Maybank. You probably have noticed the new development that's being constructed here. So we drew that in over the aerial photograph, although the photographs weren't up to date yet. But what you notice about these places is that, say here at Roper Hospital's annex building, the businesses on Folly Road are disintegrated from each other. It's very difficult to move from one part to another, and they're disconnected from their surroundings. So, for example, Maybank becomes the only way to move from here to there. So we started zeroing in on the places where logical, intimate, slow, tree-line street connections could be made. And if they were made, it would start to take pressure off the basic intersection of Maybank and Camp. So here's one of those connections. There's a possibility of beginning to link the northern end and the southern end with a missing piece of street that's here. It's obviously a potential connection in this area. And then we begin to illustrate how those could be networked together into a pattern of streets and blocks. What that would allow is the making of real public spaces where the church is located. It would allow the infill of more intelligent kind of building forms. And it would also set up the stage for smaller incremental development instead of just mega projects. Moving a little further south, same kind of analysis maps. Now we see that the corridor is surrounded for the most part by the town of James Island. It's about 3 walking distance neighborhoods laid end to end. So it's actually quite a long stretch. Here's that picture I showed you before, and the what if, now a little more gradually. What if, under the power lines here, you were to do a world-class two-way protected bikeway. That's the kind of bikeway where when you're on it, the trees are between you and moving cars. It's not like riding next to the fast traffic. It's really bike space. And you can do it in such a way that if you were smart about it, you can plant trees in a row and create just the right kind of shade while allowing for the wires overhead. And what you'd be doing is really setting up these addresses so that gradually, as the market dictates and as the property owners are ready to do that, they can begin redeveloping. So here's a scenario where you have a sidewalk and a bikeway, trees, storefronts, have a little outdoor dining. And basically, how we build and rebuild over time the edges will really determine what your experience is like in Folly Road itself. So we were just looking at this part of the map. I'll show you a couple of places. We noticed that there are small opportunities that have never been quite executed for a connection. And said, what if? What if, for example, there's this area where the old bend and the new bend meet, there could be a real quality open space created in this part. And there was a connection between the area of the shopping center and the street, so that not all the traffic had to come back to the busy intersection. So, and for the purposes of answering the obvious question, why would any property owner be interested in having all those changes done, all those new trees growing, but while they're growing, maybe they wonder, can you see my signs, that kind of thing. Why would they do that? Well, because you're really setting up a different kind of address to do more, but gently, with the property. In the South Village, we were looking a lot at this area where the Gold's Gym and the Food Line are. This is
Sorry, can you go back?
This is the Walmart right here.
Can you go back?
Sure, this one?
Commercial for?
Yeah.
Where's Camp Road in the area?
Yeah, Camp Road is just off this map.
Okay, what else are you?
Yeah, it's not, doesn't fall on that. But we'll see Camp Road in another map.
Previous
Bear with me.
map.
Yeah, Camp Road is farther up. It's off the map. So we'll come to Camp Road and the wait, here's the Walgreens, right?
In the center.
Yeah. This is Ellis Creek here.
What's that?
This is Ellis Creek. Further down.
I'm not sure where this is.
Tell you what, when we come back in just a minute, we're going to come back to the big long map. That'll be easier to go. We'll do it. And all the maps we have printed out too, so we'll get up close. Okay, so here first we illustrated the what if on the area in front of the shopping center. So this is the power line. And in other areas of the Low Country, South Carolina, electric gas has allowed bikeways to be created under the power lines. So this is a scenario for that. Now these are not the biggest, these are not the giant kinds of boats, but this is where the power lines are up very high. So you could do meaningful trees that would provide the shade. So here's a shared use path under the power lines. And then here's just the what if kind of envisions out in the future when they're ready to do something different with their property. The creation of a slim, slow side access lane and then storefront space in that. So it's possible to gradually shift from the long views across parking lots to a more town or village kind of character. I'll show you that in plan, it'll make more sense. Here's Grimble, Fort Johnson Church. Here's the Gold's Gym. We're going to look at a couple of places. Here. What's happened is that the pattern was never really established to create blocks and streets, and so everybody ends up at the same intersections, struggling for green time. You can see that pretty vividly at the Walmart. When we leave Griffith and we go out to Folly Road, 4 cars at a time get out onto Folly Road. And it's rigidly signaled, so it doesn't know how many of us are there, and 4 cars get out. Even though there's so much green time on Folly Road that there might be nobody going by on Folly, at that time, we might observe this numerous times this week, that only 4 cars get out in the Walmart parking lot along the river. So similarly, down here, if you could begin to create network around the Grimble Fort Johnson Folly Road intersection, then you would start to create a better spacing and more opportunities to go around it. So someone, for example, southbound could make that one. Someone westbound make that one. And that would allow the pressure to come off the intersection. So what if, and we started envisioning how, again, when they're ready, gradual infill and redevelopment would occur. And let's see, probably worth moving the roundabout here. That's another what-if idea. A modern roundabout in that location. We know that would drop the injuries and accidents, their prevalence a lot. What it would also do is keep moving all the time. And I'll leave it to the traffic engineers to talk about why that works better. Remember at red light means that half of us that are sitting where the light is red are not moving, and only half the road is doing anything at any given time. Half the intersection is performing. Whereas in the roundabout, all the directions of travel move all the time. U-turns are very easy. Everybody's always moving. You think of it as a fully circulating intersection. Now, further to the south, in what's called the neighborhood preservation area, you're probably aware that the county regulations allow for the folks who have houses along there. There are also commercial sites, the fish market, the clubs that are along Old Folly here. So there's a mix, and the county's regulations allow for commercial uses to take place among the residential there. And so we spent some time looking at the ways that could be done gently and allow for the folks that have invested there or stayed there their whole lives to get in on the benefits and the wealth creation of Folly Road, but to do so in a way that would keep the character intact. So here's that first what if. What if the power lines, not the ones that are up high that are transmission for a long distance, at least not initially, but the ones that are down low, which are called the distribution lines, those can be buried and relocated. So there's that. You probably know there's a traffic signal plan for this intersection. And here's a what if with the traffic signal. And we said, folks like Carmen Harriet told us that there used to be a fruit stand on this corner. To illustrate the idea of that kind of lightweight structure coming back and along the new path to the beach. So you can imagine racking your bike and getting something to eat or a drink or buy some grass basket. This is the kind of location you can do it. And with a real crosswalk so you can cross it. It's also the kind of place where if you're stuck in traffic, waiting for your chance to get to the beach, your car, you might someday be able to see the Folly Trolley passing you. Because we can create not far from here park and ride opportunities for people that are willing to leave their car further north and take the bus or the trolley to the beach. So in plan, here's the intersection we were just looking at. And here's a what if of the village gradually filling in, the trees getting replanted, and the way I described the interconnection between things. We'll zoom in on that for a second. First things first, make the continuous connection from Waco Cut to the beach for walking and biking, plant the trees. And then over time, people will begin to use their property in new and creative ways according to the county's ordinance. As they do so, it's possible to connect the parking lots. They can be creative about wiggling that between the trees as necessary in order to interconnect in the way that I've described, but also allow for efficient parking. So this just pulls the buildings away and lets you see how, for example, there it's possible to get a considerable amount of parking and to connect it, pull pressure off the intersection, and not have a giant sea of asphalt anywhere. That's one of the keys to allowing for the gradual evolution of the use in there without creating a new misery for the folks who live there. There's one last area, which is in the south, which is the conservation area, which includes beautiful long views across the marsh, and then Center Street and Folly Beach. Now, we haven't spent much time illustrating Center Street. The reason for that is because Folly Beach has done their own detailed plan for that, and it's simply stitched in. That doesn't need to be redone. And it's a complete street strategy. But in between the two, there's an important piece of Folly Road that can be dramatically changed. Here, for example, the 4-lane road, the traffic volume is actually much lower in this area. We realize people back up when they get to the beach, but the daily traffic is actually quite small. And with a handful of smart transportation strategies I'm going to let Wade describe to you, it would be possible to repurpose some of that as well and get the continuous bikeway, maybe even make an exclusive place for the public trolley to pass the cars. Now this is a different kind of transit. This is open on the sides. You can get in and out, get on and off easily, cooler on a rack in the back. So I'm going to ask Wade Walker to come up. He's traffic engineer, transportation engineer, I should say, who we were bouncing things off the whole time, and said to Wade, how do you make it so that we improve this street and it looks better like we showed it, and people love it more and they can bike and walk on it, but the traffic still works? Maybe the better question is, how does the whole transportation system work? Wade?
And Victor, I think that's the key to it. It is an entire system. It's not one targeted action. It's the whole slate of actions that can make the system work. I think we hit on something very, very key here. Right now, today, there's one show in town. It's the car on the road. We don't have a continuous way to walk. We don't have a continuous way to bike. Quite frankly, we really don't have transit service that does us much good on the road. Bus every 90 minutes is not serving the kind of needs that people need to be able to get around. So it is this whole slate of targeted improvements and enhancements to the corridor. And some of them are aesthetic, but it's really mostly about giving people choices and putting targeted enhancements that give people alternatives just to other places in the country. These are actual volumes. This is our volumes on Folly Road since 2006. And you see those drops. Parts of Folly Road used to carry 50,000 vehicles a day. They're now carrying around 35,000 vehicles a day. It's been fairly consistent. And this is a trend that we see. We track volumes on many roads in other cities throughout the country. We see this kind of profile. And the good news is that we can take advantage of that. We don't necessarily have to plan for that ever-increasing amount of traffic. That doesn't mean that you don't experience congestion on Folly Road. Of course you do. But some of the things that we would look at of how to alleviate that would be the power of network and the power of connectivity. So if we are able to better connect neighborhoods in many of the ways that Victor was showing, with some of these plans that actually offer connections, you don't have to get on Folly Road in your car every single trip that you make between 2 points. You have the opportunity to bike, to walk, and to use good transit service that we will talk about in a few minutes. Let me show you how this can actually start to work. Right now, this is the Camp Road intersection area. I'm sorry, and what we see, there's 2 traffic signals. One of the things that we do see in this corridor is there's not, the signals are very spaced apart. And so the phenomenon that we've experienced being located here is we come out by the signal at Walmart. Like Victor said, if you're number 5 in line, we figured out that you're out of luck. We're going to wait another light. And one of the reasons that that's happening is because the signals are so spaced apart. You sit there and you see no cars, but you have a red light. And it's because the signals are apart, what's called the traffic progression. And that is this idea of this synchronized signal system. It starts to fall apart as you space out signals. So you're wasting a lot of green time to move people through that as you leave a traffic signal and you're tightly packed and those cars move through the system. As people pull in, pull out, driveways, you start to get beyond about a quarter mile to a half mile between signals. That really starts to break down. So you're having to extend that green time to help your stragglers that have been knocked out of the platoon get through there. So you have a finite amount of time for a signal, and you're having to devote most of it to the main line. So what we can do is that if we actually start to decrease that signal spacing concurrent with additional connections, we can actually make the system work better and actually move traffic through the system and favor your side streets. The other thing that this does, for the comment about people not being able to get across Folly Road, it gives you more opportunities to cross the road at protected locations.
When you do explain when you are waiting to get out,
So like in an unsignalized situation, if you're in a driveway that doesn't have a signal, then in a system like this, that platoon clears those cars that are going by are tightly spaced as they move through the system, and then you get the opportunity to get a significant gap to be able to get out, because that all those cars aren't getting spaced out to where you're looking down the road, you don't quite have enough time to get out. You will have better gaps to be able to enter under that kind of situation. So again, right now you're showing the two signals that are there. They're about 1,000 feet apart. You insert these other signals at these intersections at about a quarter mile spacing, meet spacing criteria for the state, and can actually help the system work better for everybody and more efficiently. We also want to make sure we design for appropriate speeds. So what are the appropriate speeds for this corridor, and why is that important? Well, today, you've got a combination, you've got segments in the neighborhood conservation and the neighborhood conservation and conservation areas approaching Palm Beach that are 50 miles an hour, hair raising on a bicycle. But for the most part, the corridor runs between 40 and 45 miles an hour. So again, that speed differential between those different modes is fairly significant. And that's another thing, those speeds also contribute to breaking up and spacing out the cars so that they're not moving through the system efficiently. So what we would want to look at is, can we over time start to elicit changes? And it's not just slapping up signs, there's specific design changes to the corridor, many of which you saw in the images. So make it a more tame corridor, better for everybody. Decrease the speed differential between the cars and the pedestrians and the cyclists and the transit users. Make that spacing better. We would envision, eventually speeds on the corridor, between 30 and 35 mile an hour range. Now the interesting thing is, in running calculations on the travel time, it adds about 4 to 4.5 minutes end to end in your travel time if you're not hitting any additional signals. Why else is that important? Remember how I talked about the spacing of the vehicles, decreasing that spacing of the vehicles. It works between signals as well. As you space cars out, you're not moving as many cars through the system. So really, that's kind of the sweet spot. That 25, 30 mile an hour range is the sweet spot for the maximum efficiency that you can move most cars through a system. So if we start to reinforce that, we can actually make things better. Speaking of connections, we want to make sure that we have much better connections for bikes and pedestrians. So like Victor said, some of the initial steps, there's bike lanes intermittently now. But if we can create a system by which we have a continuous pedestrian and bicycle connection from the north end all the way to the beach, we think that's key. And that's going to be integral to making that a viable way for people, a viable option for people to move work. So how does that actually happen? Well, it happens over time. And it's not just on Folly Road. This is what's there today. You'll see a lot of lines for what's there today. There's a lot of things that are proposed. And as you see, we start to fill in gaps where the gaps were on Folly Road. But also we're creating additional network. And then as we add other combinations of facilities, whether they're shared lanes, whether they're off-street paths, whether they're bike lanes, you can start to build a network that starts to feed Folly Road, connect the neighborhoods to the north-south, and get you from all the way from the East Coast Greenway and the peninsula all the way down to the beach. And over time, we can really create that system that accomplishes that. I know these are a little hard to see. We do have the full printed maps over here. We'll be around after the presentation to walk you through specific initiatives and how that actually works. With that, I'm going to let John gloat a little bit about his victory, what he calls his victory with green.
Never repeat it, but
There's a lot of emphasis on quality, but it's almost like it's what happens.
Okay. I'm not sure that I follow what happens. Okay. In a lot of places, the walkway is actually. Okay. If we're looking at making these changes, the question was, if we're looking at making these changes, there's a lot of businesses that are right up to the street. Okay? One of the things that we looked at is the available right-of-way as well as the availability of the power easement. For a lot of the street, you have a power easement that runs right along the corridor. And we think that there's actually room to be able to do this. There may be some segments where we're constrained, where we have to move it much closer to the curb, but we think we can get a continuous system all the way along the corridor over time.
you never know what
Okay.
All right, thanks, Wade. My name's John Ford, I'm a civil engineer with the team here, and my task is to focus on green infrastructure. And Wade is right, this is my favorite moment in the whole slideshow. I don't know how many of you were here on day 7. At the very end of the presentation, Victor asked, what pieces of this presentation would you like to hear more about? And I was the clear champion for green infrastructure and trees. But that's an easy victory for me. Is there anyone here that hates trees? I didn't think so. I try not to get my ego too inflated because I know that trees are part of the solution here within the corridor. They're part of an integrated solution to make Folly Road corridor a better place. And my task is to show how we can get trees and green infrastructure implemented on the corridor. How do we make it happen? How do we make it happen in steps over time? So to us, we're focusing on 3 pieces. We're focusing on better landscape and open space in each context within the corridor, and how does that all tie together? Along the almost 8-mile stretch, we're focusing on trees, preserving the magnificent trees that already exist, and adding new, real shade trees, canopy trees, appropriate to James Island. And last but not least, what I call lovable infrastructure. We make that green work by filtering and infiltrating stormwater runoff, because we have really fragile ecosystems here. We have a connection to nature that we want to start to heal in terms of how we built over time and added pavement over time. And all that stormwater runoff is going and impacting fragile ecosystems. So what does that mean? I'm using the term ecological placemaking, which is a fancy way of saying, how do we connect great places, towns, with nature? We heard over and over for the last couple weeks the importance of James Island ecology, nature, landscape. James Island is a special place, you can see it right away. But specifically within the Folly Road corridor, we've seen that specialness, that connection to what makes James Island uniquely special, kind of erode over time. So we've heard a lot about when
when you get to this corridor, you know you've arrived. And you're on Folly Road, whether you're walking, biking, or driving on the bus. How do you know you arrived? So we have a common language of landscape throughout the corridor, but that changes a little bit. Because we do have built spaces, we have town. You see on the right of this diagram, we look into it in chunks. Is the intensity of town, more town, as that purple line goes up, we kind of move through this sequence of spaces, as Victor talked about. We have neighborhood centers. We have connections to nature in between as you pass over bridges, especially as you move south on the causeway with wide sweeping views. So how do we use that language to vary it subtly throughout the corridor, both to reinforce safe streets, to reinforce a pedestrian and biking experience that feels safe and comfortable? How do we add value? So, North Corridor, a bit more town here. We have streetscapes that, like the question came up, are getting a little bit tighter. How do we really fit landscape and trees within utility corridors? That's what we've been looking at for the last week. So we get a little bit tighter here. We have buildings from the street. We have the importance of green. We have the importance of trees to help inform cars that this is a slower space. We're slowing down a little bit here. We've arrived, and trees are a piece of that solution. We have nodes in between those town spaces where we can use landscape moments, we can use signage and wayfinding and public art to indicate that you're starting to arrive at an edge, you're heading towards a neighborhood center. We have a language of trees, special to James Island. We've spoken with a lot of locals here that provide us great guidance on that, what we've been working here, history here. And then as you move south, increasing importance on that marsh view. You see on the right here, and these are all up in the back. I'm happy to go through this in much more detail with folks that want to look at it. And then you arrive, of course, at Folly Beach. And you're into the coastal beach piece of the James Island thread. So kind of starting there, Wade and I are going to bounce back and forth here to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit more. This is a causeway looking north. We have that wide, sweeping view. We also have, and we spoke with a lot of local residents about the challenge. How are we going to fit additional pedestrian and bike accommodation here while respecting nature? So we came up with the idea of a boardwalk. We spoke with DHEC about this. We spoke with the state environment about this. It's a way to minimize the impact on that wetland marsh ecosystem while bringing folks closer to nature. We think this is actually an environmentally sensitive alternative that also connects people to nature. So you have the opportunity to bike, to walk. You can see some creative public art here at the entrance. And the trolley. Folly Road. So looking at that marsh boardwalk, we're starting to talk about what that would cost. We think it is a very realistic solution, an environmentally sensitive solution to accommodate pedestrian infrastructure, get connected to the community. Hand it back to Wade.
Thanks, John. Remember I talked about the transit system. Who here has ridden the bus on this bus route? If we had to vote about loved it, hate it, or no, what would you say? Pretty bad. I can tell you 90-minute headways are not good. There's very few places that you would have a 90-minute headway. The choice is more or less not having transit at all. But we think it's an incremental step of how do we make transit better. So, one of the first things that we would suggest doing is looking at this overall increment. And right now, the reason that there's 90-minute headways is that bus is trying to serve everybody with one bus and one route. So what we're thinking is if you can start to divide that up into specific routes. This one actually shows this idea of the Folly Trolley. So an intercept park and ride that then could run just between Folly Beach and the South Grimble Road area. So potential locations for park and rides. People could actually park, get on this open air trolley, schlepping their beach chair and surfboard or boogie board, go down to the beach, and it actually be a fun experience to be able to do that. But that's just one piece of it. So that kind of takes that piece out of it as well. And then if you start to look at the other pieces and how they mesh up, so you see those connections, you see the blue lines. Maybe that's a more localized route. So you broken the 31 route into 3 or 4 different segments that don't take 9 minutes to circulate around the port. And maybe on some of these more northern routes, these stars indicate places where you can do park and ride, very similar to the express that you catch right here at Walmart that takes you into town. So are there opportunities to increase service to eventually get it down from 90 to 60 minutes, from there down to 30, and then down to 15 at some point in the future? So in each of those steps, we would expect to see an increase in ridership on that service as well. Again, it's looking at making sure that we're still serving all the people, but maybe it's not just trying to do it with one route, which is then handicapped by the time that it takes to do that. If we break it into 3 or 4 different routes serving specific purposes but integrating with others, then we can get more frequent service, and we're cutting that time down considerably. And what would that start to look like? Now, this is the section up by Mike's Bikes with the center turn lane. And maybe incrementally, you enhance the transit service. You utilize the bike lanes that are there, and you see the sidewalk connections. So you fill in those sidewalk gaps to make it viable for people to walk to their transit stop. Over time, maybe you're able to green some in the center of the roadway. You see on the western side the presence of a shared use path, so that continuous biking and walking environment. Bus shelters on the east side to serve those routes as well. And then in the fullness of time, you could possibly shift enough traffic that you could dedicate a lane for bikes, buses, high occupancy vehicles. Came directly out of what you all told us on Thursday night. We saw some images on sections that looked at this. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes time, and you realize that as you increase the service and are able to shift vehicle users into other modes, because you made it more convenient and you made it a viable option, then you can start to realize things like this. You also see the two-way cycle track again on the east side. Finally, if you think of pavement as an asset, think of the space between the curves as an asset. If that asset's not performing the way that you want it to, or you no longer need that pavement for certain uses, is over time, if you're able to increase all of these other options, where you can realize drops in traffic volume, making that mode shift of modes, then you have the opportunity to actually repurpose some of that asphalt for other uses. And when you start to look on in the south of Grimble, where you have the four-lane undivided section, what that can mean over time is maybe that 4 lanes becomes 3, and would have opportunities to cross, opportunities for green and street trees. Again, the idea of the shared use path along that western side, continuous from the East Coast Greenway all the way to the beach. And then also looking at another location by the Walmart, this turn pocket for other uses. And when you start to look on in the south of Grimble, where you have the undivided, four-lane undivided section. What that can mean over time is maybe that 4 lanes becomes 3 and would have opportunities to cross, opportunities for green and street trees. Again, the idea of the shared use path along that western side, continuous from the East Coast Greenway all the way to the beach. And then also looking at another location by the Walmart, this turn pocket. Maybe that is no longer needed to be used at some point in the future. And you can really start to improve your transit service over time. Get this continuous pathway all the way to the beach. Really amp up and make transit fun. Make it fun, make it easy to use, and it's no longer an afterthought, but it is an integrated piece of the corridor, along with cars, along with walking, along with biking, and making it truly a complete street.
If people want to work as an advocate for better transit in our region, please talk to me after the meeting, and I'll give you contact information.
All right, trees are fun too. Let's integrate these trees. For those of you who are, the 50% of you that were here a couple weeks ago, you've heard me talk about this, but trees are beautiful, but they have so many other benefits, right? They have that aesthetic feel, the connection to nature, but also they add to our public health, reduce temperatures, add value, adding value outside of the public realm, adding value to businesses and homes along the corridor over time. So to me, I simplify that. Trees add to happiness, health, and value. So how do we go about doing that? We looked at the Camp Road piece of the corridor and said, what's our first step? And that's from our original outline to livable, lovable infrastructure. First of all, protect the existing trees that exist within the corridor. We went out and mapped those. That's number 1 step. We can do that. Add a median. Take out that pavement where we can, as part of a solution that includes a more cohesive streetscape, resolving curb cuts, as Wade was talking about a little bit earlier, adding a more continuous streetscape. That would reduce pavement 8% within this almost 1 mile stretch, that's a big hit. That's a good start. So that reduces stormwater runoff to our sensitive ecosystem in marsh. That's a good start. And all the sand and sediment that's carried there with it. So if we can add to that, add the street trees, add the planted strips along the edge that help reinforce that bike safety, we can almost double the reduction in pavement to green, and then layer it on top of that all that trees can do for us. Trees are stormwater machines, pulling up that stormwater runoff from the Rethink Folly Road corridor. We can build better. So I kind of predicted that you folks would like trees. So I've graded that out in terms of, we've heard overwhelming response for trees and green within the corridor. So why aren't there rows and rows of trees down Folly now? How do we get there? How do we do it? It's really 3 pieces to me. So we know there are a couple of localized flooding problems in the corridor with flat land, tough soils in some spots. When we go in and fix localized specific flooding problems, let's do it better. Let's utilize green infrastructure. Let's utilize infrastructure as civic art. Incrementally. When we replace aging infrastructure, we utilize green infrastructure to be a more cost-effective, more easily maintained, simpler solution that's lovable. Build better. And we can utilize green infrastructure as part of these comprehensive corridor solutions. So we can get some synergies, transportation funding and environmental funding to make a beautiful integrated complete street. Complete streets convey people on bikes, people walking, people driving. They also convey stormwater. That's part of being a complete street. But flipping from conveyance, we want to utilize infrastructure to make it a place people want to be. So there are these host of solutions, host of triggers for green infrastructure, and the more nuts and bolts aspects of green to be stormwater function. Not to mention environmental improvements, to be kind of touching on that, especially here, where the ecosystem is fragile, and the connection to nature already historically has been so great. So I'm not going to get into these in detail, but we've been looking at, along with the rest of the team, how this actually works. We have the room. We do have the room. Can we plant the trees? We can plant the trees. We've spoken with SCEP, and we've spoken with the county. We've spoken with DOT. We can do this. The county, by the way, I should add, we work around the country. The county has an evolved approach to green infrastructure. They've been testing innovative solutions out to find out what works, what they can maintain all the time. And I was very enthused to hear about that. So, how can we, instead of berming up our green edges, just depress them a little bit, maybe plant them a little differently? And I talked about that thread through the corridor. How does the ecology, how do the details change as we move through the corridor? How do these details change with high groundwater? We can make that work too. Systems that can be wet, be planted in wetlands. How does it work? When we get further south in the corridor, towards more floodplain, viewshed areas, we can make that work too. When we talked about the overhead utilities, Victor mentioned it a little bit earlier. SCE&G, we've been speaking with them over the last week. Very, very interested in talking about alternatives. As we all know, there's a cost to alternatives, but we've been speaking to them about that. The first step is green. We're talking about a long-term vision. Can we get those trees planted and start getting some screening? Can we get some consolidation of utilities where we can? And then figure out how, as part of a long-term plan, the cost for undergrounding utilities gets factored in. So I have this, I would love to speak with you about the implementation of green. A little bit later, we have it printed out in the back. But we want to know, what do you get started with? What are the first steps? How do you get involved next week and make this happen? Planting trees, neighborhood tree plantings, demonstration projects, maybe at a location within the corridor or a municipal building or at a school. Turn some of that pavement to green. Bring the community together to be not just talking about it, but doing it. Going out for grant funding for tree planting. First step is get started. We're going to do another quick poll here.
No, we're about to switch gears. But before we go into the step-by-step process of funding and doing, I'm going to check with you to see your responses to some of what you've seen. So we'll do a quick poll, and after that, Anita we'll go through some of that nuts and bolts of how you do it. So, first of all, let's see about this idea of a safer, separated walking and biking. How would you rate the draft vision? You can say 1 for I love it, 2 for I'm indifferent, no opinion, or 3 for I hate it. The poll is open. Change your mind, and remember the last button you press. We have 3 seconds. Okay, it's a popular idea. Next question. We realize this is a little tricky because we didn't, and we don't mean to be tricky, but you don't have enough information to know for sure about every little detail, like how much does it cost and all that. So just wanted to see if you can wake up in the morning and your part of James Island was like that, would you be for it? How would you rate this draft idea of upgrading the commercial sites? 1 for love it, 2 for indifferent, 3 for hate it. 5 seconds. More people voted this time. Okay. Another popular idea. All right. What about that idea of introducing new green spaces where the geometry permits it? New public green spaces. We're going to find out this, how important it is. 1 for love it, 2 for indifferent, 3 for hate it. 4 seconds left. I think we can another popular idea. Okay. We will, by the way, give you a chance to write down your detailed responses to this stuff. Now, what about that idea of upping the transit? Better bus stops, better buses, shorter delays or waits between buses. 1 for love, 2 for indifferent, 3 for hate it, always open. Maybe you could even swing at the bus stop. Good idea. You can have all these charts waiting. Now, this was a little more complicated, so it's going to take more time. Don't open the countdown yet. Which of these features of the draft vision are you most interested in? We're going to let you pick up to 3. So the last 3 numbers you press will be the ones that are remembered. 1 is for the safe, continuous walking and biking facility. 2 is dedicated transit lanes. Dedicated means the bus isn't stuck in traffic. It has its own lane to bypass the cars. 3, the upgraded software basically that allows for optimized signal timing on the traffic signals. 4 is aesthetics, upgraded aesthetics on and along. So that means within the public right-of-way and on the private properties. 5 is the green infrastructure ideas, the trees, and the creative techniques for stormwater. 6 will be for something else. A lot of intertwining here. Safe to say all of those are important. Probably all of those were popular when we asked you about them one at a time. But now pick 3. Let's see which 3 rise to the top. Poll is open. Counting down. I guess we're about to get tweeted. Good job. Thanks. Okay, good. Hold that one there for a second so we would see it. The top ones were the walking and biking, the green infrastructure, the upgraded aesthetics, followed by the signals, transit, and other. And we'll print these out for you later on. Last question in this round. What about that folly trolley idea of park and ride lots that would allow you to instead of getting in the queue, waiting on Saturday morning to get that last 2 miles to the beach, to park and get on a trolley that can pass the traffic. Would you support the establishment of such a thing? 1 for yes, 2 for probably yes, meaning some question remains, 3 for probably not, and 4 for no. Poll is open. Counting down, 5 seconds. Lots of yes and probably yes. So I did my math right there. That's at 91%. That's probably yes. So now let's talk about next steps. If you like it all that much, what does it take to do it? How would we find the money? And how should we implement it step by step? And this is Anita Morrison. She is an urban economist, which means implementation geek. She'll explain it.
So we've been working on the whole question of implementation. We have a great vision to start with, and it has just a lot of moving pieces, a lot of separate projects that together build one upon the other to make a better and better place. So we need to form a structure that allows all of the communities to work together toward that same vision. We need to set policy frameworks that make sure that every decision the public sector or the private sector makes is in line with that vision. And then we need to put together a whole series of packages, really. We need to take projects and put them into small bite-sized pieces so that when a funding source becomes available, so I think you've heard a lot with the Recovery Act, with the stimulus, what happened was they looked for projects that were shovel-ready. and those were the ones that got funded. So it's that same kind of opportunistic planning. So let's make sure that our projects are the ones that will be funded in whatever round of programs happen into the future. Yeah.
I love all this, and one thing about, can this happen? If the environment that we live in, nobody is making tree closures and dig down with large zoning.
Right. And
That
we've been asking that question ourselves because there obviously has been a history of some friction, but everything we're getting from all of the elected officials we've talked to said, yes, we do know how to work together when we have a joint project that makes sense for all our people and that we all believe in. So one of the things we're going to talk about is organization and how do you do that. So the 5 pieces tonight are just how do we get started, how do we manage the project, specifically with the question of the politics of it, how do we find funding, what do we do now to get started, and then how do we keep it going once we get started. So clearly it's a long process. It's going to take several years because there's so many different pieces of it, and price tags on some are fairly significant. If you talk about replacing the Wapacut Bridge long term, you know, those kinds of costs are going to affect how quickly we can develop. But we think the very first thing is we executed a memorandum of understanding between the jurisdictions that sets out how they're going to work together, under what kind of structure, how they communicate with each other, how decisions are made, and how the whole process will work. We need to adopt the plan in each of the jurisdictions and make sure that the overlay district that has been adopted by the town of James Island, the county, and the city of Folly Beach include zoning that reflects this vision, so that it might include a few tweaks or refinements of the code to include things like bringing those buildings up to the sidewalks. So that would then require each individual jurisdiction to adopt any required zoning amendments to make that consistent. And we'll be looking at incentives. A lot of this happens on private land. And so that means we need to have the private property owners willing to participate. So things like making those connections between parking lots, closing a curb cut. Those are things where we want to provide incentives for doing the right thing and making sure that they participate with us. And then finally, focusing very specifically at the beginning on some first priority projects. And we have some ideas for you as to what those might include. So managing the project, what we're suggesting is that there be a committee, a steering committee of elected officials that meet periodically with a set agenda and with the staff. So we need a full-time project manager whose job every morning is to get up and go and find the money, find the, work with the property owners to get things done, work with the individual jurisdictions to move the project forward every day.
And ensure quality control.
And ensure quality control. So we expect that this person to be proportionally funded by all the participants so that everybody has some skin in the game and has accountability for that person's actions. We want to create a joint staff review and design board review process or design review board process so that all of the projects that are developed in the board go through the same review, and the staffs from the different jurisdictions sit at the table together in making that review. One of the things long-term that we'll need to be concerned about is how do we maintain this infrastructure? Once we put in the trees, once we have these paths, how do they get swept? How do they get maintained long-term? And we're suggesting that that's probably a joint contract issued by the 4 jurisdictions in order to have consistency of maintenance that will be important to really protect and maintain what we're going to invest in. So looking at the funding, what we need to be is flexible and adaptable. Our projects need to be packaged so that they're fundable. So from a grant writing perspective, that means hitting all the buttons about the things that, the objectives of the funding programs, the foundations, when they're looking for, to fund certain things, they have priorities, and we need to be respectful and anticipate those priorities so that our projects compete well for those grants. One of the ones that you've heard of perhaps is the Tiger Grant, which is a transportation grant that reinforces and includes complete streets and all of the elements that go into making a complete street. So that one in particular will be one we look at very closely. There is the standard federal transportation funding that comes from the gas tax and other funds. We need to be in the long-range transportation plan that's put together by the COG starting this fall for the next round. And so if we want to be a part of that funding mechanism, we need to be ready and prepared to submit at the right time. There's a transportation alternatives program also with federal dollars that supports specifically bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So that would be one very ideally suited for this area. And the question is the scale of this such and the importance of it such that we should be thinking about the next half-cent sales tax. We had a successful program of a lot of important transportation improvements and enhancements over the last few years since the first half-cent sales tax was enacted. But we look for another half-cent from the voters by making sure that our project is part of the list of projects that would be funded and supported. And then finally, there will be some local funding techniques, tax increment financing for specific kind of public-private partnership projects. A municipal service district could be appropriate for something like the maintenance of the infrastructure. And then for new development, impact fees might be appropriate to add to the process that new development goes through now. So we want, given this excitement and this momentum that's already started, we wanted to find some things that could be done really quickly. Road improvements notoriously take a long time. You have a lot of engineering, you have a lot of process to go through, and you get in the line and you wait until your project can get funded. So we didn't want to pin everything on the next transportation improvement plan. So what we talk about now in the field is lighter, quicker, cheaper. Things that the community itself can do, or things that can be done with local monies at fairly low price. So some of those things, certainly starting off by building community support, engaging the public, and helping everyone understand the value of the green infrastructure and all the rest. I think ideally the first project might be planting trees. Just take a piece of property where we know the trees won't be in the way of where we eventually want to put a path, and start to plant those trees. It could be a great community effort, bringing your kids out to plant trees. We could paint crosswalks in the intersections, make sure that people recognize the need for slowing down as they get to dealing with the pedestrians. And then a whole series of things, farmers markets.
So if anybody goes out tonight and does a guerrilla crosswalk painting project, please be careful and watch for the oncoming headlights.
Okay. And then once we've got that first couple of years under our belt, how do we keep it going? So we need to make sure that all of our projects are in the funding list, they're in the competition for local dollars, for state and federal dollars. As I mentioned, if our projects are shovel-ready, they're much more likely to be funded and much more likely to move ahead. We want to move ahead and coordinate with SCE&G about using their utility easements to build our pathways. And we want to start securing strategic parcels in the few places in the network of parallel streets to Folly, and we need to purchase a single piece of land that would help us to create a better network that could be important. So we picked out just a few projects that we think are really critical in the next 5 years. That would be starting with the continuous pedestrian and bike shared use path, at least in the commercial core in the next 3 to 6 years. We think that would be a critical investment to getting a good start on this project and answering some of the concerns that we've heard expressed over the last week. As I mentioned, connected, so make sure this road network can help us better avoid being on Folly Road if possible. I mentioned planting trees, bring your kids out. This can be totally organized by the community to get started planting and building our green infrastructure. Starting in making investments in your farm stands and looking at ways to enhance value throughout the corridor. And then syncing up the efforts of all of the governments to work together toward a common vision. And then these horrible traffic lights, let's get them working together and timed accordingly.
Thank you, Nina. Isn't she a cool economist? Yeah. We know questions remain. A lot of questions, lots of blanks to be filled in, a lot of additional research to be done. Questions remain about those ambitious ideas for cooperation between the city, the county, the town, and the city, and the council of governments. I have to say this week has been a case study in phenomenal cooperation between those entities. So whatever that history was, Hatfields and McCoys, the big swamp gun was aimed across the harbor at one time from James Island toward the peninsula. That was then. This is now. And now it looks like a cooperation time. Questions remain. But for us, in order to go on and do the next phase of our work, one question is more important than any other. We need to know whether you would support the implementation of those things. That means would you actively be going? Well, we know questions remain, but you can tell us probably yes or probably no. Oh, it's open. We're counting down. This group would probably come back to more meetings and talk to their leaders and say yes. Okay, next question. What about that going again to extend or continue what's been so successful here locally, that half-cent sales tax? You can be designed so that is picking the pockets of the visitors and fund the Folly Road improvements. Would you support an additional half-cent sales tax? 1 for yes, 2 for maybe, 3 for no. Our poll is open. Counting down. Survey says 82% maybe or yes. Okay. Most important question. Are we generally on the right track? Questions remain. Lots of questions about the cost and so on. You can say 1 for yes, 2 for probably yes, 3 for I just can't tell yet, and 4 for no way, no how. Poll is open. Let's count down. Consultants, please duck. All right. That's very encouraging. 86% yes or probably yes. Thank you very much. That. What do we do next? We have a feedback form. It's printed in yellow, I think, this time. And we passed out pens. Don't leave until you've taken the time to answer the questions in here about about your participation over the last week and the many ideas you heard described up here in the presentation. Next, you can give us your feedback, you can ask questions or propose ideas, and you can get updated on the latest by going to the Mind Mixer site. Last time I checked this morning, there were over 125 minds mixing using this website, follyroad.mindmixer.com. You can actually propose an idea, your neighbors can say, I second that idea, or I would improve that idea, and if so, how. This summer, we'll have a draft report ready for review to be passed around local government. This is what the Mind Mixer site looks like. It's really easy to connect. If you haven't tried it, go on there and check it out. And so, can we bring up the lights the rest of the way? First of all, join me in thanking the volunteers and the staff of the Council of Governments and the city